Again, I think Mike really helped set the tone for the discussion tonight about engaging the community. I think hopefully you saw Mike's comments as kind of unvarnished truth. The way things happen, I can say the experience that I alluded to in the comments at the end, I've watched the AMP project move from that rational argument for transit, and if we just get the rational argument for transit out, people will get it and we'll move ahead. I've seen the move based upon much of the technique that Mike described move to a very political campaign. And the reason it moved to that political campaign is because the opposition was operating much as Mike described in a political campaign framework. And the pyramid of influence really is appropriate. We could go through and spend some time just talking about people and their involvement, and it would fit right into that pyramid as we're trying to move people in and up the level. But it's usually a little bit more complicated, not quite as obvious as that. And I think the three people we have here tonight to talk with us about the community and engagement with the community on transit issues will, I think, bring an interesting flavor to the techniques and the approaches that are used to try to bring about influence on a project such as transit. I will say one thing that is clear sometimes, but in thinking about Mike's comments, the one thing that's different still about Middle Tennessee right now is we don't have a vote on this issue that's clear and unambiguous. We've kind of seen the evolution of probably a vote on something in the General Assembly even tonight. There will probably be a vote on a capital budget at Metro Council that will include money for the AMP. But beyond that, we don't have that crystal clear up and down vote that the process that Mike talked about is ultimately headed towards. In Honolulu, if you followed it at all, it was all about a referendum. It was about a tax vote that the people were going to vote on. In some other cases, the city council votes that he was describing were a clear up or down vote on a project. So we're still operating here in an interesting environment where that framework for decision making is a little bit more elusive than it has been in these other situations. But one would think that the dynamics probably are still somewhat the same. But we have three people that can talk to us about that. So I'm delighted. I'll just kind of go down the order here. Charles Smith is here. From Barge, Wagner, Sumner, and Cannon. Charles is in addition to the panel because Will Reed, who was our original person in this role, this is kind of awkward. I don't want it to sound like it's good or it's better, Charles, that you're here. Then I'll get back to Will, and then I'll be in trouble with Will. But this was a compliment. Will is a graduate of the class. Some of you met Will the first night we had our photo taken, and Barge Wagner was a sponsor. And Will was here representing the firm that first night. Well, since he agreed to speak, Will has been appointed as the Director of Construction at TDOT, which is a really significant move. It was an honor to Will. It's an honor to Barge Wagner, Sumner, Cannon, and certainly an honor to TDOT to have that happen. And so he was still trying to work out the scheduling, but it just didn't work, as you can imagine, making that kind of transition. So we are fortunate that there's a great bench at Barge Wagner, Sumner, Cannon. Charles is here. Sam Hatcher. Sam is one of those people that I think is borderline institutional. I don't mean that in terms of being committed. Sam is, many of you know Sam. Sam is from Wilson County and has been a regional leader for many, many years. You have bio and material you have, so I won't take a lot of time. But that institution that he, to me, represents is his activism with Cumberland Region Tomorrow, with regional efforts, certainly with us, the Transit Alliance, and here at TCLA. He has a long history in publishing and probably understands the dynamics of communication as well as anybody. And he's had to do that with a bottom line involved. not just as a pundit, but as somebody who's been responsible for the success of newspapers across our region. And then next is an alum of TCLA, one of our mayors that's an alum. Randall Hutto is the mayor of Wilson County. And Mayor Hutto has been very interested in transit from the time he came into office. I'll never forget my first encounters as they were always him asking a question. It was always about, I need to know this, or what do you think about that, as opposed to, I'm here to tell you something. And I think as a public official, having someone asking questions and always listening is an incredible attribute at the core of our sort of democratic process. And I don't have any hesitation in saying he is one of those elected officials that if I were to go into office, or others that I care about, he would be a model because of the way he operates as a leader in Wilson County. And that was behind his decision to do what you're doing right now, to be a part of the academy and to graduate and provide that leadership. So those are our three panelists. The subject tonight is engaging the community. This is really to involve all of us. So I will ask some questions from time to time, but I'm more than happy to let this begin to flow from all throughout the room with these three people. But I think I would like to start, and I'll just start with you, Charles. I would like to ask this question. As a person at a large engineering consulting firm, when you all meet in the back room about a project, how do you talk about the people that are going to be involved as public participants in that process? Are they just pawns? Are they citizens? Are they numbers to be counted? Talk a little bit about how a consultant that knows he or she has to get through a public involvement process in the community prepares for that process.
Okay. Can you hear me? All right. That's a really interesting question. I'm glad you asked it, frankly, because that's part of what I wanted to talk about. Honestly, my approach to projects has always been, over the last 20 years or so, that I want the project to be valuable. Okay, to me, it's not about the win or the loss, or forcing my opinion on somebody or forcing my project on somebody. I want it to actually serve its intended purpose and serve the public. So knowing that I'm going to go into a public involvement process and knowing that I'm going to get grilled with reasonable questions and unreasonable questions and good opinions and opinions I don't agree with, I steel myself and prepare myself to deal with people as people. You know, I think about them as somebody who has a family or somebody who has a home or something that's important to them. And as I prepare for a project or prepare specifically for public involvement, I want to be receptive to what do they need, okay? What is important to them? And to the highest degree possible, I want that project to meet their needs. Recognizing that there are conflicting needs and conflicting opinions, I'm still going to strive to find the thing that meets the needs the best of the most people. So that's how we talk about it.
Okay.
You know, and that's how I think about it.
Sam, I'm not sure if you were here when Mike threw out an interesting statistic in their survey work that said some 70+ people in their sample don't want anything new in their community. Does that resonate with you in terms of Middle Tennessee, or do you think that's off? How did you react to that?
Like Charles, I'm glad you asked that question, because sort of one of my pet peeves, maybe, and I'm going to do a parenthesis and throw in a plug for Cumberland Region tomorrow, and maybe I'll discuss that, but on April the 30th at the War Memorial Auditorium, are they aware of this?
Yes, in fact, we had to change our schedules to be free to be there. Yeah, so no,
go
go ahead and plug it. But
well, I won't go into that, but you're all invited to come to that that afternoon to that session, and there should be more than 700 people. at this event at the Power of 10 Summit this year. But what always frustrates me about the Power of 10 Summit is that these 3, 4, 5, and like I say this year they're expecting 700 people. It's sort of like preaching to the choir, because all those people, as many of you or all of you, are in support of a lot of these issues dealing with growth and mass transit. And, we go there and we sort of speak to that choir, and we get up and leave, and everybody pats everybody on the back and says, this is really good, this has really been good. But those people are not the people we need to be reaching, and I suspect that 70% won't be at the Power of 10 Summit, and frankly, I think we've sort of missed the boat on that a little bit in sending our message, and I think our message needs to go somewhat to a blue-collar worker that may be sitting in a manufacturing plant working on a assembly line tonight or some sort of a production line tonight, that's probably going to vote for Randall Hutto in the mayor's election coming up. But he needs to know a little bit about mass transit issues and why they're important to him. And, why do they affect him, and how do they affect him? In some way, I think we're failing to reach for those people. And I guarantee you those people are influencing the man sitting to my right when he goes and leads our county commission or leads a public issue that, he's going to listen to those people. And I think we're really failing to reach that. And, I think we need to bring into these conversations union leaders, teachers, educators. I think we need to broaden our audience when we're talking, and not so much just to professionals and people that we know or we feel comfortable are going to be on our side of these issues.
Okay, good. Well, Mayor, that's a really good lead-in. I mean, in some ways the same question, but maybe to make it more precise. When you're at a Wilson County Commission meeting and there's a controversial issue there, and you look out over the room, does it make a big difference to you who shows up for that discussion, or are you really going to rely on all the research you did ahead of time in the email? Talk a little bit about that idea of what really influences a leader like you on an issue. Assume it's controversial, and maybe it would be about transit in the future, maybe about funding transit in the future.
Not glad you asked me that question, and could you ask me another one? No. The point is, when we have a county commission meeting, I can lead, I can facilitate. The bottom line is what those 25 county commissioners want is what happens. And the people in the back, what they want normally happens. And I'll go on something that happened not long ago. We had a tax increase that was proposed. We were hurting in our fund balance. We needed another high school in Watertown. We had a couple of elementary schools that need to be renovated and a pre-K through 2 built. We also said, hey, we need some money at the solid waste and we need some money at the highway department. So 21 cents was put on the docket. We had some people show up with some signs, and they were pretty vocal, but it was 50. It was 50 people out of 117,000 people in the county. And those 50 people got that 21 cents down to 7. So those few people do make a difference, because they were talking to those commissioners that were there, and that commissioner may or may not have had any calls at home about it. And the commissioners, they did their homework. So the homework said, for me to provide the services that you want as a citizen, it's going to take 21 cents. Now, we're glad to not raise it, but don't holler at me about your potholes in the road. Don't holler at me about your trash not being taken care of, or those things that you need. And that's what the people tell us. We want these things, but I don't want to pay for them. And that's a hard pill. So I think communication, from my standpoint too, is the hardest part of my job. To let everybody know in the county what we want to do or where we want to go, or just to educate you on it so you'll know. There is no one good communication source that I have found yet. Everybody don't read the paper.
Some read it online, some watch TV, some don't. Some keep up with Facebook, I mean, there are a lot of media sources, but for me to send a blanket email or send a blanket statement out to the county right now, if you said, I'll give you $1 million to get everybody the word tonight that this is going to happen, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So communication is tough. Selling it is tough, and even in this line, that those commissioners knew the right thing to do was 21 cents. 50 people changed their mind.
Wow. Sam, maybe working back on a point the mayor just raised, there was a day when communication from somebody like your perspective means writing a good press release. That's it. The mayor just sort of opened the door that I think most of us are aware of. How do you see the communication in a region today on issues, and let's just take transit as a good example. Talk about the different techniques and costs of those things.
You know, this has changed so much, and I owned a group of newspapers this time last year that I sold, and so it may be a little easier, Linda, for me to have this conversation tonight, but the papers I had were community newspapers, and according to the data that the University of Missouri School of Journalism, they do a study in the fall, I think really every other year, on community newspapers. And I've watched that study each time it's published, and the readership drops just a little bit and just a little bit and just a little bit. But even the last study that was produced, I guess last year in the fall, showed that still people in communities rely, 77% of adults 18 years and older still get most of their news, their local news, from the community newspaper. And you know, that excludes the Tennessean. You know, we're talking about papers here would be like the Green Hills News, it would be like the Wilson Post in Lebanon, or the Lebanon Democrat, or the Williamson Herald in Franklin. Those type papers people are still reading, and you know, they're getting messages, or they're getting people are able to communicate through that. But obviously the social media is such a big thing as well. And you know, I understand what Mayor Hutto is saying. It is tough to get that message out. You know, I go to a rather large church in Lebanon. It's the College Hills Church of Christ, and I think we have like 1,600 members. And you know, I'm amazed at that church. Actually, they call it Six Flags Over Jesus. As a matter of fact, it's so large. But
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I am amazed at the people in that church that I don't know, and I think about that, about how do you communicate with these people. I meet somebody new every day. I met a guy that's the eye doctor for the Titans the other day that goes to our church. But you know, how do you communicate with those people? And I say all that to say that we put out a little bulletin type thing on Sunday mornings, and you know, there's always a couple of news flashes in that thing of things that have happened in the community during the week, or things that the church may be involved in. And I'm thinking, man, you know, that's a great place to reach 1,600 people right there with an issue. But I do think that's a tough matter, and I don't know that there's a single answer to that.
Charles, one more, and then we're going to really open this up. So I hate to take advantage of your role as a consultant, but I'm going to do it again. But let's say that you're having your client is a government, and the project is a transit project. And you know there's some real problems out there, but they haven't quite surfaced yet. And they may require some mobilization of people to head off what's going to come once this project becomes more well-known across the county or the region, whatever it would be. Do you feel it's part of your job to help on the front end work with your client to anticipate those things and develop sort of the defensive strategies that you would employ? How far do you lead in that, or how far do you say, we're here if you need us, but we're going to let it surface before we get actively involved as your experts?
No. My perspective on that is that if I do that to a client, then it'll be the only job that I have with that client. Okay, it's, my perspective is that when somebody hires me, I have a specific set of things that they're expecting from me, but I view my job as, I don't want to surprise them. Okay, that's a huge part of my job. I don't want to surprise my client. And a surprise would be that landmine that I should have seen coming, or that he should have seen coming. And in the context, I was listening to what Mike was saying earlier. And a referendum is a different kind of a situation. In a referendum, it's all about the votes, okay? But when you're not talking about a referendum, in my opinion, it's all about the project and its value and the engagement, okay? So if I'm and I've done this, I mean, when I've had big projects that I knew were gonna be very controversial, and I've had several of those, I wanna find out who's opposed to the project and what their opposition is, not so that I can shut them up or so that I can drown them out, but so that I can work with them to find out, is there anything that I can do in this project that's gonna satisfy them? Because the most valuable ally that I've had in projects like that is the one who was against it, who's now for it, because his message that I was against this project until I learned X, Y, Z, or until they showed me that they were gonna meet me in the middle with, IJK, those people end up being the most active vocal advocates. And so I want to know who's opposed to me, but again, it's not so I can win the war, it's so that I can try to meet their need.
Right.
And you can't always, there's going to be people who just completely object to it, and once you've arrived at the point where, okay, they object, I can't do anything to help them, and their objection is not legitimate, from a community standpoint, or, then okay.
Yeah.
But the really important people I identify are the one who has a problem that you might be able to fix. That's the guy I want to find.
And that's a real important observation. Had we had more time with Mike, a question I would ask is that the opponent, and he kind of said if they're opponents, they're always opponents, so you move on to other people.
Yeah.
And I think you're suggesting there are people who might think they're opponents, but are open to some kind of additional information or persuasion from various sources. Yeah.
Or sometimes it's just a compromise, but the
Yeah.
compromise doesn't have to kill the project. It may even make the project better.
Yeah.
So those are the things I'm looking for.
Okay, the panel's warm. There questions or comments or interaction you'd like to have with any or all of our panelists?
Well, on that note, about the compromise and stuff, I mean, I think with the AMP, we've seen the mayor create a citizen group to be a part of the AMP, to field input and those kinds of things. So is that the kind of stuff that maybe should have been done more on the front end of things, as far as to be able to push the project forward quicker? Is that kind of the things that you're talking about?
I'm not going to second guess the way the AMP project was run, because I'm involved in the AMP project now, but I wasn't at the outset, so I don't know what the whole process was internally, so I'm not prepared to criticize any of it. But forming groups of citizens, I guess I didn't catch the first part of Mike's presentation, but any of us that have worked on public projects, we want to identify the stakeholders at the outset. The stakeholders are anybody that could be affected by the project. And we reach out to them at the very beginning. I did appreciate Mike's comment about early on, those are not public meetings. Those are one-on-one types of things. And because you're trying to identify what are the legitimate oppositions or legitimate questions that are going to come at us, and are some of them actually going to benefit this project? And the ones that aren't going to benefit the project, we want to be able to prepare to address them. But yeah, sure, the forming a citizens group or something like that, and Ed, tell us. I mean, I assume there actually probably were things like that done at the beginning.
But there were some.
Yeah.
There were some, and I think I'll be quiet. I'll be quick because I'm not on the panel, but no, but I think there's always a dance between early public involvement before all of the engineering and design work has been completed. And so the issue, for example, of dedicated lanes in the AMP, the issue came out of the box, there will be these dedicated lanes, and they will be on this stretch of West End, and then the battle began, when in fact we knew in the project that 30% design was not sufficient, and that was the first phase. It's called preliminary engineering and design. That was not sufficient to make the case either from a traffic engineering point of view or a projected ridership point of view, if that made sense. I mean, the assumption is that it would. And so you had this opposition, and at the point in time when you might have seen a citizens advisory committee get involved, it didn't exist. And meanwhile, a new team comes on, the team you're currently on, comes on, and they're doing the 70% of engineering work and looking at those very issues. And so in some ways, the timing of getting this group going right now is probably pretty good. But then there's another school of thought that says the timing is very much related to the opposition and how it's been raised. In either case, the involvement's there. Yeah, Mayor?
And I think, just from a mayor's perspective, every project that we start that's new and different, if you start something, you say, well, when I have my first meeting, they're going to ask me all these questions. So we've got to get all this done. So you start trying to do that, the word leaks out, and they say, well, you haven't talked to us. And wherever you start, somebody on the backside is going to say, well, now why didn't you do that first? And you could have done that first. You just got to choose. I think you got to choose your path of least resistance to get something started. And to go back to what we said a while ago about the AMP, I think every project that we do will meet resistance. If it doesn't meet resistance, it may not be that big a deal. So expect the resistance to come, find out what their issues are, listen to them, and change where you need to, but make sure that you got the best interest of your constituents, your whole constituents, not just 3 or 4 in mind when you make your final decision. And sometimes that's tough to do.
Mayor, one additional question. You mentioned there's not one clear choice in terms of public messaging. You've kind of got an array of different ways to go there. What about beyond public messaging? What are some other tools that you use to generate community support? Or do you have some folks that lead teams to actually go out and engage with the citizenry? Or can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, and what we've tried to do there in Wilson County, for example, is that we've identified some people in our smaller communities, 2 or 3 people, and let them be kind of our voice there, and also our ear as well. We don't want to take the place of the commissioner because he represents or she represents those people. But we want some people out there that are in that little Noreen community or Statesville community or Cottage Home that we can go to and bring in and say, tell me what's going on out here. What do you hear? What are the problems? Because they'll hear it at the local store. They'll hear it at church. And that's a way for us to hear that kind of feedback. Otherwise, a lot of times those people grumble and you don't hear about it until it's too late. So we try to have those small groups of people to help us intervene when we're there. We, and Ed will know this, we talk about communication, and I don't take away from the paper or anything. I think all of them are great. But we had thought about running the Music City Star a week from Saturday down to the Music City Marathon, letting it be a free ride, looking for money to make that happen. But we said today, or this last week, how do we get the word out to everybody that, hey, there's going to be a free ride down here. You don't have to get up and try to find parking or pay for parking. You can just get on the Music City Star. Our goal there was definitely to help those citizens out, but to show them what a big deal the train ride is. For us, and when I was in leadership class before, to get people to give up their car to get in there, that's the problem. But every time we have a weather event and they have to ride it or want to ride it, ridership grows. So it's just a change of mindset. And for me to get my commission, for example, to say, let's give more money to the RTA. Let's do this. It is the right thing to do. But for them, that's changing dollars from the highway department to the railroad department, and that's a little bit, that's tough. So I think back to your first question, we try to find those people that we know are talkers in the community that listen. And there's those people. Mayor Anderson said from Williamson County today, he said the last vote they had there, 10% of the people showed up to vote. we live in a fast-paced world today where most people, and I hate to say this, really don't care unless it affects them. And you got a few people that when it affects them, you're going to hear from. And there's a few people, like you leaders, that are really out here wanting to make a difference. But, I mean, I know I was a teacher and a coach before I became a politician. I didn't have a clue what was going on in Wilson County. I mean, I went to work every day. I come home every day. I dealt with my family, and that was it. When I ran for office, I had to go to all these events, and I said, wow, there's a bunch to do here in Wilson County. So I hope that answers your question.
So, I have a question. I do research at Vandy. I'm also an engineer. And something I wonder about, the question came up earlier about bringing in the MIT expert to, convey the information to the public. Like the expert says, this is what's important, or to what extent do you see that those experts, the engineers involved in like the traffic studies and those things, what role do you see public education plays? A lot of times I feel like the engineering and those things are kind of viewed as black boxes, especially when you say model. It's a black box that the general public doesn't understand what those inputs and outputs are. So to what extent does the science need to be translated to general public education to help get the word out and get buy-in early on?
To me, I guess.
Any of you?
I'll start. I think you're right, the black box. We were trying to get an expo center in Wilson County. So we had MTSU to do a study for us. Paid them $15,000. And it came back in a positive realm. But nobody wanted it. Nobody, there were a lot of skeptics out there. So the $15,000 was really thrown out the window. So they don't really care. I think the public education part, I think we have to put it in very, very simple terms. I'm going to use the Expo Center as an example. The Expo Center for us, if it broke even, that's a win for government, okay? The economic impact is where we make a difference.
I've worked on lots of projects like you have where you stand up to give a presentation and everybody's looking at you like you have three heads. And what I learned from all that is not to just prepare my presentation. I got to find out what do they care about. And that's the only thing I talk about. I have to do all my homework. So I'm going to do the study, and I've got every detail of design and model and economic impact, and I've got all that stuff. But when I get up to talk to them, I'm only going to address the things that I know they care about in the most simple way that I can. But there's always going to be one or two people in the crowd who are really smart, and they might be against it. So they're going to ask me some really detailed question. And then when I give the really detailed answer, that even boosts your credibility more. So I guess my tactic is I don't overwhelm them with the details. I try to focus on what they want.
Yeah, Sam,
I think lots of times too, and I'm going to come up with an occurrence that happened not long ago, but one of our city mayors in Wilson County was considering a proposal with county government to create what would be a business park in Lebanon. A great idea on 400 or 500 acres of land, and he proposed that by writing an ordinance for the city council to vote on, but described it as an industrial park in the ordinance for the city council, which was a bad choice of words. A number of the builders, developers in the county got really upset. Neighbors in the neighborhood got really upset. It was because of the choice of words industrial, and they were seeing smokestacks and all heavy industry going into this park, and that wasn't the intent at all. The intent was to have a business park with white collar industry, corporate headquarters, mixed use, commercial, and residential even as part of it in this park. Great idea. But the bad news is it got off to such a bad start because of that just one bad choice of words. And I think you know, I think that hurts so many times in the way you communicate to the public, going back to what we were talking about, the way you communicate to the public. I think you have to be so deliberate, I guess is the right way, to think about how you're going to communicate that message to the public, because that's one really good example of where miscommunication really hurt that project.
And this 400 acres is next door to Sam, by the way.
Comments. Your predecessor, Mayor Hutto, once we were working on the commuter rail project from Lebanon to Nashville, and I never will forget, he looked at me one day and he said, Diane, I'm not gonna buy no pig in a poke. Well, I'm a city girl. I wasn't sure what a pig in a poke was. So my husband was from rural West Tennessee, so I went home that night and I said, what's a pig in a poke? So he told me, so next time I saw him, I said, I don't want to buy one of those either. But the other thing is, I think it's the smartest person in the room is not always the best spokesperson for your project. You see some people who are brilliant and they know it all, and they get up and they start talking, and they're gonna give your county commissioners the same speech that they're gonna give the engineering society, and they just lose the people. It's got to be, just like you said, it's got to be, direct for the audience that you're talking to be effective.
I've got a comment to make too about that commuter rail, because that brings up a great story. When Bill Purcell was mayor of Nashville, our mayor in Lebanon at the time was opposed to the commuter rail and was just creating all sorts of problems. And our mayor told me that at the time, he said, you know, I'm so sick of Purcell saying that the train's going to run from Nashville to Lebanon. And he said, you know, if these people would realize the train's actually going to run from Lebanon to Nashville, I could be for it. So I called Purcell and I said, you know, let me tell you the problem. I said, you keep saying the train's running from Nashville to Lebanon. I said, if you'll say the train's going to run from Lebanon to Nashville, our folks up here are going to be for it. He said, consider it done. He called the mayor and he said, you know, Mayor, I've been thinking about this. I think we ought to run that train from Lebanon to Nashville. And our mayor said, okay, I can do that. I can do that. And truthfully, that's the...
But that's a great example of, you know, the fact that don't give up on the people that are supposedly opponents. That's right. Eventually, you cut your losses when you realize that, okay, we're never going to meet in the middle, but there's a lot of ground in the middle that can be covered by just talking to people.
I'll say this and then I'll be quiet, but someone I learned a lot from many years ago in dealing in the newspaper business, you got complaints a lot about what was printed. And the person that I learned a lot from told me when they call and they start complaining, the first thing you say is, you know, I understand what you're saying. And all of a sudden, the tone really softens on that. You may not agree with what they're saying, but you can say, I understand what you're saying. And all of a sudden, that tone is changed immediately. And then you let them rant as much as you want to, and then gently tell your side of it. And, you know, more times than not, that has really settled a lot of problems.
Okay, one other question, Sam. Being from the newspaper business, and I understand that business too, and I agree with you, the urban market business is shrinking, but the community newspaper is still very viable. So the question is, when it comes to a matter like public transit, is it more effective to have letters to the editor or op-ed pieces that are in a proponent's voice versus some other advertisement or communication style in a newspaper? What have you seen to be more effective?
I think the letters to the editor column are very effective, particularly if they're people that you recognize in the community. And, you know, I start saying small communities, but really in any community, People recognize the ministers or the pastors at churches. They recognize those names, and they recognize teachers. And I was thinking about that a few minutes ago. A particular issue may require a particular style or point of communication. If you're trying to reach teachers with a communication issue, you're going to go to a forum where teachers are recognized. It may be the WCEA in Wilson County, but I do think the op-ed pieces in small town newspapers are very effective because they're written by people that people know for the most part. It may be an industry CEO or some community leader, but yes, I think that's the most effective part.
Well, speaking of the train from Lebanon to Nashville, I wanted to talk just maybe a little bit, or maybe you can give a little insight on the Hamilton Springs development that's out there. Was that something that you, having been to this class, were able to maybe go out and attract developers to do that, or was because the Music City Star was there, they came to you and you saw the economic benefit from that? Or could you maybe give us a little insight on that?
I can't take any credit for Hamilton Springs, and I believe Jack Bell was in the class and maybe could have been part of that project that maybe helped start that or kickstart it. And they've done a fantastic job there. I will say, since they have come up, what we have done is try to identify large tracts of land along the rail from the county mayor's position to talk to people like Gross Builders and people that built Hamilton Springs to come in, because we know the baby boomers, for example, are I think how many turn 65 every day? A bunch, and so we know that population is something that we need to try to contend to. So we were looking for gated communities along the rail so that when the keys are taken away or when it's not safe for them to drive or they don't feel like driving to Nashville, they can hop on the rail, come into Nashville. For us, the AMP is a big deal. If the AMP goes through, then you can ride to Nashville, go up and down West Main, or go down Broad, and then go back home and never get in your car. So we're trying to identify those tracks for not only condos, but for gated communities for elderly. And even we thought in the Watertown area there, in the rural area, maybe some 1 acre lots again, because so much today, like in Providence and Mount Juliet, they've gone to those half-acre lots or even smaller. Some people now are kind of branching back out and want a little bit more space. And so we are trying to identify that, but Jack and them, long before I got there, had designed that and have done a fantastic job. Just landed a $1.6 million grant, I think, that they're there having a, matter of fact, on their way right now. And we thought we were going to get to go, but Sam said he'd buy us some beer on the way home.
Well, I think that's probably a note on which we would close, is to say there was a sacrifice tonight with the mayor and Sam, because they had thought they had it worked out that they could get from here down to Riverfront and then ride the train out and do beer and the whole, it's Transit Now has kind of put this deal together. You may have seen some of the publicity. So thank you for the intoxicating nature of this environment, which is pretty good too. I want to thank you all for taking this time to show. This is important sharing and the perspectives, three very different but I think very honest and committed perspectives on what we're all about here. So thank you all very much for doing it. Now, Lydia, how are we going to handle the report on the Vision City visit?
I think Mike gives a little update.
Okay,
Yeah, Mike,
great.
I'll be real quick. Several folks from the city of Franklin went to Carmel, Indiana, just outside us north of Indianapolis, and had a good chance to meet with the mayor and several other folks, and I think there were four things that stood out to me. One was strong leadership from the local government community. There were a lot of creative ideas discussed. Public-private partnerships was a big issue that they dealt with really strongly, and transportation was a big issue. And I'll go back and talk quickly about the individual pieces. The strong local leadership, we were talking about how to get support. In this case, the mayor really has set a vision for the community, and the community has gone on board with that. I know as I deal with things in the city of Franklin, a lot of times the first people that are opposed to a project are the ones that use it when it's built. So in Carmel, they built some things that a lot of people were opposed to, but as they were built and opened, a lot of people were there using those facilities. So they were real strong leadership from that perspective. Creative ideas, they have 72, I believe it is, roundabouts in that community that's about, 20,000 people? I mean, it's a very Franklin-sized, similar-sized community, 50 square miles, but 72 roundabouts is pretty impressive for them to make that kind of commitment. And then public-private partnerships, there's a lot of things that they have gotten together with the private community and the public community on how they address city planning, how they cooperate on city parks. Parks are donated to the city, but the developers are still maintaining them. So there's a lot of really cool things there. And then transit, they're a lot of ways behind where Nashville is. They're still working on BRT routes, bike share programs, that sort of thing. So they recognize some of those issues. We talked, Jay has sort of educated me on the first mile, last mile issues. They've dealt with that or starting to deal with that relative to bike share programs. So that was interesting to see some of that. So it was a great trip. Kelly had a big part in setting that up, and we had, I think, about 40 folks from Franklin that went to that. So it was good. Appreciate it.
Another trip took place. I hope you saw the picture of Pete joyously getting on transit, but several of us had the opportunity to, and Reggie cannot be with us. He's out at Leadership Middle Tennessee tonight in Sumner County, but he was also on the trip with the Nashville Chamber does an intercity visit. Some of you have been on those before, and this year the intercity visit was to Vancouver, British Columbia. And so we had the opportunity to go out last Wednesday and spend a very packed 4 days, coming back Saturday evening to see Vancouver. And Pete, we haven't prepared anything here, but I'll offer an observation or two maybe you could offer, because transit was very much a part of the fabric of Vancouver. An observation I had, first of all, was a catalytic event. They were very clear that they had done a lot of planning and a lot of talking about transit in Vancouver, which isn't a lot different in size in the Nashville region, but the Olympics and the fact that they had to have this connection, especially from the airport to the downtown and the Olympic Village area, put deadlines. I remember one speaker was very clear that they had deadlines they could not miss. And if they didn't live up to those deadlines, then the whole approach they were taking to moving people around the city during the Olympics would not occur. So that was one takeaway, and it doesn't mean that we're going for the Olympics. But there was some observation by several folks that the Final Four experience, a different scale, but we all saw how transit can be a part of that, and maybe to use those kinds of examples to move people up that pyramid, if you want to look at it that way. The other observation I'd make, and I'm giving you time to think. No, the other observation I would make is, and this is different from here in many ways, was the consistency of message that we heard about the interrelated nature of housing and social services, transit, land use, that those are all interrelated, and they're tied to that pretty commonly held goal that Vancouver wants to be the greenest city on the planet. And that's more than, we hear those kinds of things, but my takeaway, this was more than a slogan. It was a clear-cut message. We heard people from the city of Vancouver, from some outlying areas, from the transit authority, plus the business sector. We had a lot of different speakers, but there was a consistency of message on what they were trying to accomplish in terms of what the urban environment would be in Vancouver that I'm not sure we have here at this point in time. That was a very impressive thing to me. Somebody, I think Mike, I was talking to Mike, he said, well, Ed, you remember you're in the Canadian planning culture. Well, I think a little of that. I think there is some difference in how the Canadians approach that function from their British tradition. But I think there's been some hard work done there to create that. So I don't know if you want to offer any other thoughts. Yeah.
I'll stand up so folks can hear me. First of all, I'd say if you get a chance to go, go. It is beautiful. It's a fairly new city. It's been in existence a little over 100 years. Very modern, lots and lots of high-rise, multi-purpose buildings that may have office and residential combined. But a very extensive public transportation system with rail, with buses, I guess streetcars. I saw buses with electrical, electric trolleys. And then they've taken actual lanes out of the roads, if you can imagine this here, right? Taken lanes out of the roads and created big, beautiful bikeways all through the city. So that's been a big initiative, is bike transit and pedestrian transit. So you're looking at a city that's got about 1 million more in population, a metropolitan area, but a more condensed environment. So you've got natural boundaries with water that we don't have here. So, comparing and contrasting, we've got a much lower boundary for sprawl. So it's much easier to sprawl here than it is to sprawl there. They've got to go up. They've got to really focus on density. And I may get this a little wrong, but what they said over the last 10 years, they've added 1 million people, and they've actually reduced the number of cars on the road, which I didn't think was possible, but they've done it. So they're expecting another 1 million people like we are. So we're looking at a model that, there are some differences, but a model that was very, very impressive. And it gave me hope that we can find a way to put transit solutions in place. We probably will never get to the point where we can take cars off the road or reduce traffic, but we could really help, dampen the impact of all these new residents coming. The only other thing I'd say to this metro area, I think, is a talent magnet. You look at a lot of foreign investment in Vancouver. The downside to that is price inflation, housing, $1 million and up for a home there. 82% of average income is spent on mortgage, on housing. I don't know how you sustain that. So that's a big difference. But if you get a chance, go. And there were a lot of great takeaways.
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And there was an example, I don't know, Pete, how you felt, but I saw conversations we have about affordable housing, kind of goes back to what we heard here and what Mike also talked about, and that's a code word for those people and all of that. As they talked about even the conversion of the Olympic Village into these very expensive places, but everywhere there was public involvement, they talked about the off-market rent component of the development. And I don't know, I had this personal reaction to, I got curious, what does that mean? I mean, I knew that it means that market prices were not the setting the rent or the sale price. There was something else that was moving in, and it was their philosophy and their approach to dealing with affordable housing, which then there was no magic formula there. It was based on the type of place and so on. But that was an interesting. Now, coming back, I don't know if you saw it. I brought the Vancouver paper home, reading on the plane coming back. There's an article which I'll get out, Liddy. You do your thorough bugging me on this. But there was an article in the Vancouver Sun that said they're now beginning, and we heard a little of this, they're beginning to see a problem of the displacement of people around transit-oriented development because they can't afford to live around transit-oriented development. It's kind of that moving out, and they even use the phrase, move out to where you can find the mortgage payments you can afford, which is the way we've always described the moving out in the sprawling environment that we have here. So lots of dynamics.
Yeah, there's a pitch for that, too.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, I think when we're on time.